I'm Jillian D. My day job's at the USDA in the local and regional foods division. I work on the Regional Food Business Center project, pretty new, been there about a year, and I'm based in Philadelphia. Kate, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Really excited to be here today with you. I'm Kate Seybold. In my day job, work at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture as the Farm to Institution Coordinator. So get to, as part of that work, implement local food for schools, LFS, as part of my work, which is exciting. We are excited to present the research that we did for our grad program. I live in Minnesota, in Northfield, just south of the Twin Cities.
So over the summer, Kate and I completed our grad studies in sustainable food systems at ASU. And today we're just going to walk you through a high-level overview of that project called Operationalizing Equity. And we're hoping that you all, after hearing this, will be ambassadors of this information. We actually have some questions for you all too. Hope that's okay if there's time for that. And one of the goals for this is that we didn't want this to just be an academic report sitting on the shelf. So that's one of the reasons we're really excited to talk to you about it. And we are going to throw a lot of information at you. It was just really hard to boil down what we heard. All of the individual stories were so nuanced and particular to each state, but we tried to pull out the themes. So just know that even though this will be kind of high-level review, there's a lot more detail in the report itself, which we'll share after the presentation. So why this topic? This study explores how state governments are using LFPA and LFS funds to develop or advance local food purchasing programs that target socially disadvantaged producers. And we really wanted to explore this topic because we wanted an opportunity to learn firsthand how states were working to prioritize socially disadvantaged producers. We wanted to talk to the people implementing the programs to see how they're operationalizing the goals, really to answer questions like, were LFPA and LFS challenging the culture or even initiating a conversation about building equity into procurement? How are states thinking of keeping up the momentum after the funding is gone? Basically, it was just a great way to get a sense of what was happening out there and lift up some of the themes and hopefully share what we learned with others. As a side note, in our report, we touched very briefly on the topic of equity at USDA, which is a pretty big topic, including the Equity Commission and existing programs for socially disadvantaged producers. But we noticed that there's a lack in support around market development, market access, and procurement for these producers. And that's really what LFPA and LFS sought to target. Next slide, please, Andy. So in terms of methodology, 31 states participated in our research, representing all 7 regions outlined in the RFA. Some states participated for LFPA, some for LFS, and some for both. Our research had 2 components. We sent a survey to all 50 states. For the survey, we had 31 total respondents, and we interviewed 17 people representing 14 states. And you'll see the list of states here, excluding those who wanted to remain anonymous. In terms of limitations, our report represents the viewpoints of state agencies who self-selected into the research process. So it doesn't give the full picture, but we've heard from AMS Commodity Procurement that it is a decent representation of what they have been hearing from the states, and they've been in touch with all 50 states. At the time of our report, 28 tribal nations and 3 territories were awarded funds for LFPA, but we did not conduct interviews with them. We also focused just on the state agency implementers, not on subawardees. Like socially disadvantaged producers themselves or intermediaries, so this is an obvious limitation. Also, it was still fairly early on in the implementation, so there was not yet information about program impact, but I did want to note that AMS is working on a cooperative agreement research project right now, which includes analysis of LFPA, including LFPA in tribal nations, and they'll be reviewing the data and reports that have started to come in from the cooperators. Okay, so moving into background, this quote is from one of our interviewees, but they were by no means the only one to remind us just how dire and terrifying the pandemic was. They said during COVID, we had slaughter and processing plants go down. There was nowhere for us to take those animals. It was terrifying that we were going to have to depopulate pigs. There was nowhere for us to go. Many of our interviewees very much felt a responsibility to the farmers and the hungry people in their states to do better and be more prepared for the future. And they were excited about LFPA and LFS as a way to do so. So as part of a large swath of pandemic response programs and funding, AMS established LFPA and LFS in 2021. And the purpose was to improve food and ag supply chain resiliency. They were a way to help shore up local food systems with an emphasis on targeting socially disadvantaged producers. So for why states applied, you all probably know that, like many of you, state agencies have been really stretched for capacity the past few years, and in particular for LFS, where there was no funding for added administrative support, unlike LFPA. But we heard a few themes from states on why they applied for this funding. The actual person leading the charge for putting together the application had the frame of mind it was the right thing to do. So this quote is from one of our anonymous interviewees who said, it's pretty simple. We see federal and state resources every day for years go to row crop farmers and farmers who have generational wealth, who haven't had to make purchases such as land and equipment, or had generational knowledge passed on. So some really saw this as a way to try and create a bit more equity in federal resource distribution. Secondly, some states were getting some pressure and or collaboration from partners and grassroots advocates to apply for the funding and think creatively about what this program could do to support local and socially disadvantaged producers. And third, there was some pre-existing work to support socially disadvantaged producers in their state. And this was a really big one. We covered 2 case studies in our report. One was Connecticut's DEI working group to engage BIPOC producers, which was funded from a specialty crop block grant a few years prior. And our interviewee described how this was a really great foundation for leveraging an existing and growing network to reach producers about both LFPA and LFS. And then we also covered Minnesota's Emerging Farmer Working Group that came from the state legislature in 2020 and has grown into an Office of Emerging Farmers in the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So now we're going to switch gears to program design.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about kind of what we heard from states in terms of how they've designed their LFS and LFPA programs. So if you go to the next slide, among the 31 states that completed our survey, the vast majority, in fact, all but one, chose to subaward out their LFS and or LFPA funds to other entities rather than directly purchasing and distributing that food themselves. For LFS, which you see on the left side of the screen, most states are establishing those subawards with schools. Some are also setting up subawards with food hubs or distributors. And for LFPA, which is on the right side of the screen, many states are subawarding to food banks, food hubs, and other partner organizations. And for both LFS and LFPA, in some instances, these subawardees have been identified through a competitive grant process, and in other instances, not. Next slide, within the context of program design, we asked states how they are targeting socially disadvantaged producers. So for both LFS and LFPA, the most common way that states are targeting socially disadvantaged producers is by encouraging subawardees to buy from socially disadvantaged producers and conducting targeted outreach to producers who identify in these groups. Some states are also offering LFS or LFPA funds, some of the states that are offering LFS or LFPA funds as competitive grants also prioritize subawardees with previous experience or clearly defined plans for how they would purchase from socially disadvantaged producers as part of their subawards. There are also some states that are going a step further and requiring subawardees to purchase certain amounts from food from socially disadvantaged producers. And so interestingly, this is a strategy where we saw some divergence between how states are approaching LFS and LFPA. So if we look at the next slide, you can see that there are 13 states that participated in our survey that indicated that they're requiring LFPA subawardees to buy certain amounts of food from socially disadvantaged producers. making it one of the most common strategies alongside encouragement and targeted outreach. So a few quick examples of what this looks like. In Minnesota, LFPA subawardees are required to purchase at least 70% of food from socially disadvantaged producers. And in Kansas, they established a tiered purchasing structure for LFPA, with tier 1 producers being socially disadvantaged producers, tier 2 focusing on beginning farmers, and tier 3 kind of including all producers. And so subawardees in this state, which are food banks, must purchase at least 25% of food from those tier 1 socially disadvantaged producers. But if we look at the next graph on the next slide, when we look at LFS, we see that the strategy of requiring LFS subawardees to purchase a certain amount from socially disadvantaged producers is much less common. So whereas 13 states who participated in our study are using LFPA funds this way, only 3 are for LFS. And we'll get into a little bit of why we think that might be in the coming slides. So on the next slide, we also saw differences between LFS and LFPA in regards to how confident states are feeling about meeting their targets for reaching socially disadvantaged producers. So as some of you may know, states were required to provide plans to the USDA for how they would target and conduct outreach to socially disadvantaged producers, as well as establish target outcomes for the number of socially disadvantaged producers that they would engage, and the amount of dollars that would be spent on food from socially disadvantaged producers. So first, it's important to note that for both programs, the level of confidence that states reported really ranged from 1 to 10, which speaks to, I think, an overall uncertainty that many states are feeling regarding the number of socially disadvantaged producers that they'll successfully engage through LFS and LFPA, as well as the difficulty that some states are having in identifying or conducting outreach to these producers. States reported uncertainty around just the number of socially disadvantaged producers in their state, limited capacity of state staff or subawardees to do effective outreach, and a lack of resource infrastructure such as supplier lists to identify producers. But it's interesting to look at how confidence in reaching socially disadvantaged producers varies between LFS and LFPA. While states set fairly similar average target outcomes for what percentage of funds would go to socially disadvantaged producers, so 45% for LFPA and 48% for LFS, states were more confident in reaching that target outcome percentage when it came to LFPA compared to LFS. So the average level of confidence for LFPA was a 7.9 out of a 10-point scale, compared to 5.7 out of 10 for LFS. However, within LFS, the average reported confidence for reaching small businesses was a 7.5 out of 10. So we can go to the next slide. You may be wondering, why states are less confident in the amount of LFS funds versus LFPA funds that will go to socially disadvantaged producers. And Jillian and I were wondering that as well. And we think there's a lot of reasons, some that are beyond the scope of our research, but there are a few key distinctions that we discussed in our paper between LFS and LFPA. So first, unlike LFPA, LFS targets socially disadvantaged producers and small businesses. This was laid out in the RFA from the USDA. So with this broader focus, some states may be choosing to take a more relaxed approach to targeting socially disadvantaged producers for LFS if they know that they'll be reaching small businesses, which is a much broader definition. There are also some differences in sectors when it comes to LFS and LFPA and the end recipients. So what some schools, thinking about LFS, what some schools need or expect may look very different than what for instance, a food bank or another entity may need to pack, for example, a food box for a family. Schools have cycle menus, a lot of menu planning requirements, and they're operating at a different scale and also often on a different timeline. So at least in some instances, it can take a producer of a certain scale or level of wholesale experience to feel confident or prepared to sell to a school. And so LFPA may feel like a better fit for some socially disadvantaged producers. However, I think it's really interesting to think about how LFS and LFPA, especially together, can help producers in scaling up and gaining that level of experience needed to confidently sell to schools or other institutions. Another key difference is that, LFS and LFPA are not necessarily starting on the same footing. While LFPA is, we heard from many states at least that LFPA is a somewhat new type of program for their state. Whereas LFS is building on, decades of farm to school work in many states. So when we asked about the type of farms that schools are buying from with their LFS funding, one interviewee noted that the majority of farms that schools in their state are purchasing from are farms that they already had established relationships with. So perhaps it feels easier to establish preference for socially disadvantaged producers or even require subawardees to purchase a certain amount from socially disadvantaged producers in a new program like LFS in a new program like LFPA compared to LFS, where many subawardees may have those pre-existing relationships already established. And then finally, and maybe most notably, as Jillian mentioned, LFS does not support administrative funding. And so states and subawardee capacity for outreach to socially disadvantaged producers for LFS may be limited. Many states who completed our survey reported that they're using a portion of their LFPA funds to support personnel costs, either at the state level and or for their subawardees. And our interviews highlighted the impact that these administrative dollars are having on outreach efforts to socially disadvantaged producers. Meanwhile, the lack of administrative funding was one of the top challenges that states listed for LFS implementation.
All right, now we're going to move forward and talk about a few strategies for success. And there are three major themes that we heard. First was the value of public engagement. So this is a quote from one of our anonymous interviewees talking about the deep and longstanding culture of who they serve at their state agency, which historically had been farmers who grow commodity export crops. So they noted that there's a challenge in building trust with farmer communities who are new to them, like socially disadvantaged producers. So they put in time and energy into public engagement through listening sessions, webinars, town halls, and surveys to really understand who these farmers are and how their needs are different than large-scale commodity growers. Many states even took the time to just get out there and meet these producers who were new to them and hear what their particular needs were and build that into the design of their LFPA and LFS programs. So LFPA and LFS gave them the chance to do this, in some case engaging these producers for the very first time. A second strategy for success was states building in as much flexibility as possible and reducing the administrative burden for applying for funding. So this first quote is from New Mexico, and they talked about structuring the RFP process to make it as easy as possible for producers to apply, ensuring the state was not beholden to the lowest price bid, and demystifying the process of even responding to bids. The second quote is from Arkansas, where they found a workaround to ensure farmers could be paid right away. They developed a pro forma invoice outside of their normal state procurement procedures so that subawardees, which in this case was food banks, could be reimbursed prior to delivery from the farmer. This shortened the time frame for getting paid for the farmer, which was critical for these producers who rely on the cash flow. And then the third strategy for success is about dedicated outreach to socially disadvantaged producers. So we've talked about this a few times now. It seems obvious, but there are a lot of challenges that states had to overcome to reach these producers. So we heard distrust in government, both state and federal, cultural differences in how rural farming communities and state agencies do business, the lack of time or understanding for farmers to navigate government systems, and a lack of broadband access in rural places. One example that stands out to me is the case where a farmer took a photo of their cost sheet rather than submitting a spreadsheet, which cut the award in half because it was only one product that was accounted for in the paperwork. Or another farmer who turned in the proposal just a couple of hours late, which disqualified them entirely. So to overcome these, states did things like they hired translators to do outreach. They hired extra staff where possible to support the producers every step of the way. And they were doing their best to learn and adapt as they went. It was so unfortunate, Albert. I agree. It's just some of the stories were so wild. And then there were the lists. So many states started or added to a list of producers for outreach in order to share this and future funding opportunities. So other states are straight up sharing the list with schools to connect directly with producers. And we talked a lot about this, Kate and I, just as we were writing the report. And while lists can be a helpful tool, ultimately states spoke to the underlying issue, which is the need for dedicated relationship building with these producers. You know, it's not really enough to just have a list of names, even though that's helpful, but it's really important to get to know the farmers and what they need to ultimately better serve them in the long run.
All right, so next we'll highlight a few of the positive outcomes that states reported seeing. You know, our research happened relatively early on for many states' implementation of LFS and LFPA. But we had many that were eager to share outcomes that they were already seeing. And so one quote here is that a state shared that this is their first venture into wholesale, and they hope that the success of this program is that they have the confidence, being the producers, to go out and make connections with other businesses, whether that's a grocery store, restaurant, hospital system. So the next slide outlines just a few of those kind of positive outcome trends that we're seeing. One of the most commonly highlighted outcomes is, you know, simply just the new relationships that are being formed between buyers and farmers, and the hope that these can extend beyond LFS and LFPA funding. Several states also highlighted how LFPA and LFS have prompted more productive collaboration among state agencies that they hope can continue and expand beyond LFS and LFPA as well. And for some states, LFS and LFPA were the first time that their agency has collected demographic data on socially disadvantaged producers in their state. So through the design of these programs, states are presenting an opportunity for these producers to self-identify, to track purchases, for reporting requirements, and in some cases, build contact lists for producers to be reached and contacted and connect to new markets. So in a sense, LFPA and LFS have forced some states to account for equity-focused data in this new way. Next slide. We also want to highlight just kind of how states are thinking about sustainability. So given the positive outcomes that states are already seeing from LFS and LFPA, we definitely heard that sustainability is top of mind for many states as they think about these programs, given that they're currently one-time funding opportunities. So states are hopeful that the relationships and trust that are being built through LFS and LFPA will extend beyond the cooperative agreements. And they're thinking about these new relationships along with other aspects of these programs and how they can inform and support other programs at the state level. And if we go to the next slide, the other piece that we heard around sustainability is, you know, that we heard from several states that they see LFS and LFPA as an important opportunity to make the case for sustained investment in local and regional food systems and supporting socially disadvantaged producers at both the state and federal levels.
Okay, we're in the home stretch. We're going to talk about recommendations. We have some for USDA, for states, and for further research. So starting off with recommendations for USDA, a few that we wanted to highlight were, first of all, collaboration across mission areas and agencies to reduce silos and more effectively serve stakeholders. And this is especially true for FNS and AMS. In the case of LFS, so many acronyms, AMS was implementing this program without deep knowledge about how schools procure food, and in particular from socially disadvantaged producers. Kate and I actually had the chance to present this research to the farm to school team at USDA, and a representative from AMS Commodity Procurement was there. And with all those folks in the room, we were able to highlight this and start that conversation, which was actually pretty cool. Secondly, develop systems and resources for cooperators to better understand what USDA already offers. There are so many programs, especially now, that stakeholders have trouble understanding what is available, what pertains to them, and how to access it. And I'll share that this is part of the role that the regional food business centers will play eventually, but much more support is needed to help stakeholders make sense of all of these things. And then third, advanced recommendations in the Equity Commission's interim report. USDA gathered a group of very smart people to put thought into how USDA can continue to push equity across their programs and services. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend you check it out. So this is one-time funding, but USDA can work to establish incentives for contractors to purchase from socially disadvantaged producers on an ongoing basis, create a pilot within FNS to purchase 50% of foods from socially disadvantaged producers, and provide funding to cover costs of outreach and relationship building with these producers, which is also what our research found.
And then in terms of recommendations for states, we heard so many insights from the states that we spoke with, and they had some really fantastic recommendations that we wanted to pass along, as well as conclusions we've drawn by kind of getting a more overarching view of these programs across the country. So there are more in our report, but we'll just cover a few here. So for states, we recommend, first, more internal state collaboration among agencies and programs within a given state. So thinking about, departments of agriculture, health, education, they're all doing food systems work often in various capacities. And so creating space to come together more regularly to align programs can save time and energy and provide more holistic support within a state. And that it's also important to include tribal nations in these conversations. Second, sharing ideas across state lines. This was something that we heard from a lot of states we spoke with, that they would find value in creating or finding more opportunities for states to speak with each other on these programs. So calls like this, where it's folks from all over, are so valuable. And I think this might have actually been the most commonly heard idea from states. And it just shows that, I think state folks are hungry to have more time and opportunity to learn from one another and be able to brainstorm and not necessarily always have to recreate the wheel. Third, and this is a big one, if there's no budget, time, or human capacity for doing targeted outreach to socially disadvantaged producers, it is much, much more difficult to reach them. The vast majority of states do not have, good relationships with these producers or even know where to begin. And so these positions need to be funded, or collaborative partnerships need to be established to help, reach them and build that trust and relationships. And finally, it's important to include socially disadvantaged producers in program design, decision-making, and planning. You need to know who they are and ideally have relationships with before you can do this, but it will take time but make a more effective impact if this is done from the outset. So it takes time and hard conversations, but we heard from many states that it's paying off.
Okay, and lastly, we had recommendations for further research that included better understanding how cooperators structured their RFAs, contracting, and/or procurement process for these programs. States were finding they were each reinventing the wheel, and were really curious to understand how, through these nitty-gritty technical ways, other states were targeting socially disadvantaged producers as beneficiaries. We'd also love to see research specifically on LFS and its intersection with farm to school. How does LFS connect to existing efforts, and in what ways has LFS and farm to school worked together to build a foundation for local purchasing incentives? I think the National Farm to School Network is working on this. Or kickstart the large-scale expansion of local procurement for schools, in particular from socially disadvantaged producers. What can we learn from these programs that we want to bring forward to future USDA or state-level programs? And then lastly, we'd also love to see impact evaluation of the programs when there's more data available to do so.
All right, so with that, thank you all for letting us share our research with you today. If you want to go deeper, it does feel like we threw a lot at you in a short amount of time. So if you want to go deeper or just more slowly, you can check out the executive summary, which was kind of the foundation for this presentation. You can also read the full report if you'd like. we would encourage you to check out the recommendations section. We gave you kind of a snippet here, but the full recommendations are meaty and about 5 pages long. And this is where the work is going and where you all, I think, can think about your role in helping to push things forward. And we would just also say, feel free to reach out to us. Even though we're done with our grad program, we're still, both kind of working in this space professionally and also really care about this work personally. And so we'd love to hear from you. And with that, we can kind of open it up for discussion. We're happy to answer questions. And as Jillian mentioned, I think we also have some questions for all of you as well that we can get to when conversation slows down.
Thank you all so much. And everyone, remember to don't be shy, 1. And 2, feel free to use the chat to put in your questions. I had a specific question from a slide way back, which I'll go to because I have access to them. In the program design slide, actually I can share screen again so everyone knows what I'm looking at. The subaward to partners, I was curious what you meant by partners in LFPA program design. My interpretation to that is you mean like food bank. In our model of LFPA, our partners we think of as the vendors or distributors. So I was curious what a partner was.
Yeah, that's a good question. So partners was kind of a more broad term to capture, like if they weren't subawarding specifically to farms or distributors and food hubs. So it could be a food bank or some other, nonprofit entity or, any sort of kind of community entity that is in the role of distributing food. So we were trying to really figure out like if it's going to distributors, food hubs, farmers, or other groups. So it's a more broad category, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's like a point of distinction or distinguishing that we do in ours, and what we think is nuanced is when you send the power of the purse, the power of the budget, when you send that to the purchasing agency, like the food bank, versus when you send it to the vendor or aggregation or farm food system, where we see the change in model happening in LFPAs, that second story. What happens when the funding starts with the vendor rather than the food bank, which is, in my opinion, how it's historically worked, even if there hasn't been prioritization of BIPOC growers. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And gosh, something that we didn't get to in our research, but would love to hear from others on that perspective, because I think it's a really interesting distinction and a real opportunity with LFPA in particular.
Right.
A quick question. There's also a hand up too, so I can wait.
I just wanted to add, New Mexico is really fortunate because our food bank buyers come from a history of gourmet cooking and small agriculture. So they have the purse strings, but we trust them to try and find what we call fair market prices, but which are prices that balance making sure that the producer gets paid a fair price and making sure that the food banks get the most amount of food possible. And, I just want to say that the food banks, it is possible for them to be really good allies in this. I know that sometimes there's been some issues with the sticker shock, but we've been very fortunate.
Dion, feel free to go ahead and Dion, did you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, unless you were still talking, because I think I couldn't hear you. So I wanted
Oh
to
no,
make
I
sure.
was saying that you should go.
Oh, My question is LFPA meant to measure the success off of how much food a food bank or any entity can get with these LFPA dollars, or is the measure of success how many farmers did we support? I know that answer, but I just want to reply to that comment respectfully.
I want to hear what your answer is.
Yeah, sure. For me and my understanding, and I had somewhat of a play in helping write LFPA for Arizona when I worked with the Arizona Food Bank Network, and I'm no longer with them. And I'll say that as well, so you understand that this is just Dion Washington talking. But it is to my understanding that LFPA is measured off of really investing in our local food system and in our farmers, with an understanding that food banks procure the way they do historically, and that's understandable. We're not trying to change how you do your day-to-day, and we understand that you have a different budget and you actually buy food sometimes with a different budget, and that's fine. We're not trying to change that. But do you, food bank, understand that these funds are specifically designed to pay fair market prices to farmers? Yeah, it's crazy that microgreens are $52 a pound, maybe to you, or a CSA box is $30. You normally pay 15 or 10. That's okay in this program. I thought that we were supposed to report that we did exactly that. And then how did it stimulate that farmer and their economy? Like I can keep going. I'm going to stop talking there, but I just want us to be mindful of the farmer if we're talking about LFPA.
I mean, I'll just agree with you. I think that my personal interpretation of what success is for both of these programs is about the investment and what that ends up looking like for the farmer at the end of the day. And I'll say, like, in thinking about like the original idea for this project, I was like, how are we actually going to say something meaningful about this if we're not talking to any of the socially disadvantaged producers who are the intended beneficiaries? That's a real drawback. So I just want to name that and underline it as one of the things that I do hope gets researched, and I do hope comes out with the AMS project, the research project that is being undertaken. I mean, they're working with MSU and Tuskegee, and I think they're going to do some qualitative, but like we need to understand, we need to know, did it actually have that impact?
And I do think, you know, what states are being asked to report to the USDA, again, it's just, you know, or I should say, I know for LFS, it is the number of producers and the dollar amount being, you know, being spent on food, and then the kind of subcategories of the number of small businesses, number of socially disadvantaged producers, and the dollars going to each of those. And those are, I think, you know, they can be helpful, right? Benchmarks for helping to think about the impact that this is happening, that these programs are having, but they are just, you know, they're just numbers, and they don't necessarily capture those like stories and the farmer voice and perspective. And I think, you know, we did hear in some of our interviews with states how they're really thinking about evaluation in you know, a much broader way, a much more qualitative way as well, to try to capture some of those perspectives and voices that you know, aren't being captured just strictly in these numbers that they're having to report. And so hopefully that is happening, and we're able to center those farmer voices.
Thank you. And I'll say one more quick thing, and then environmentally, like how is it changing the green print of a local farmer delivering to their local food bank or local pantry? Something else we could be capturing to continue to advocate for LFPA to continue, and LFS.
I just want to highlight, there was a question in the chat that asked about discussions around using technology to better empower underserved producers. And this is from Albert, who said the restaurant community have been able to take advantage of tech during COVID, but those solutions may not be suitable for food system participants upstream. Do you all have thoughts to share about that?
This is an interesting topic. I will say it's not something that that we explored much or that came up much in conversation in our research. So I would actually really love to hear if there's others on the call that have input on this. I think one piece of kind of the technology conversation that came to light in our interviews was just around farmers having access to, good, reliable, high-speed internet and the need for that in terms of being able to submit proposals and communicate with buyers and all of that. But we didn't get much into technology beyond that. So yeah, would love to hear if others have thoughts on this.
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm an administrator for our LFPA program here in Nebraska, and our organization has a Bing chat license, commercial license. And so I was able to use it to kind of create a geographic and population equity map to find that sweet balance between rural support for farmers and rural food deserts, and also urban food deserts where they tend to be harder to penetrate with support. But the tools are pretty helpful in speeding up the process dramatically.
I just want to note that there have been a few comments in here saying, it's a farmer program, not a food bank program. I think one of the things I really love about this program is that it's actually both. And I think that is something that's really powerful about it, because I know as long as I've been working in this field, there's been a real tension between accessibility and price for farmers. And I think the magic of LFPA is that it is something that's really addressing that, and that is helping us find a spot where we don't have to choose between those two things. And I just don't want us to get stuck in a sort of false dichotomy around it either works for farmers or it works for hunger relief. And because I think that the secret sauce is when we can find things that make it work for everybody. And I want to make sure Rebecca Serratos gets a chance, has had her hand up.
Hi, thanks all. This has been an awesome conversation. I wanted to circle back to what something Jillian said that you said it so succinctly, and it encapsulates my experience with state agencies, when you said, and then there were the lists. And and I think kind of going back to that technology comment of, oh, we don't have relationships with underserved, historically underserved farmers. We'll throw a list together, we'll put a website up, we'll get technical assistance going, check, moving on. And then you so eloquently laid out that relationship building and trust take time. And I'm seeing the rub between wanting to get something done for the purposes of this funding, showcasing, yes, we engaged with these number of farmers across the state, but then also that being it. I wonder if in your research you could dig in or just explain a little bit more. Did you see or hear from others on the need to go beyond just list making and website posting in terms of how to sustain interaction with underserved farmers?
I'm so glad that you asked this question. And I think it gets at a little bit, I wanted to respond to Susan's comment too, which I think is an interesting one. It's not so much that the states are like asking for money to do this outreach to BIPOC producers. Like, I agree with you, Susan, it should be something that is like part and parcel to their role as public servants. But I think the thing that struck me through talking to people is that there are so many folks who are working at these state agencies who do want to get beyond the list. Like they feel like as constrained by the culture and systems and processes of working at the state government as much as anything. And that they are on the inside in this way, like trying to do things differently and push the boundaries. And that's what was really exciting about the program, is like they felt like they got permission in a sense to do so. I mean, we can argue whether or not they need permission, maybe they should just be doing it to begin with, but that's kind of a different conversation. So I would say yes, in some cases, but I think it's like it seemed to me, based on the folks that we talked to, that we're just like at the beginning, frankly. Like there's so many states are at the early stages of that conversation, and there's a lot more that they know they can be doing, and they're just like working through it a day at a time, trying to figure out when and how to do more. But there was a lot of enthusiasm around the sustained relationship building based on some of the new partnerships that they had built, like through the public listening sessions and through working with BIPOC producer networks within their states. Like making those connections were really meaningful to people working at the state agency who like, they just felt like they didn't have those relationships. They didn't exist before, so they had to start somewhere. And so they were building in some cases from scratch and from nothing. And it's they see how much time it is going to take them to build that trust and understand who these folks even are. I don't know, Kate, if there's anything that you would add.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said, Jillian. I think it was interesting just how often lists came up in our discussions. And I think that there's some states also saw a list as a way to like start building towards sustainability within the timeline of LFS or LFPA. So thinking like, if we are able to like build this list over time in LFS or LFPA, like this is a list that can then live on, beyond the program. And so some saw it as like a sustainability piece, but I do think, many states did really underscore like that need for relationship building and the time that it takes. And so, maybe it's a yes and, right? Where like in some cases the list could be a starting point. And one of the pieces around lists I think came up a lot was with schools and hearing, just that, LFS funds can't support administrative, work at the state level, but also, schools cannot use any of their LFS funds if it's going through a school, for instance, to do that outreach. And so, in our interviews, we heard from states saying that many schools where their staff is really limited in time and capacity, because maybe it's a nutrition director who's doing, 5 different jobs, that like that list as a starting point is a helpful way to begin that relationship building. But I think, again, it's the list can't necessarily replace those relationships. And so, yeah, a lot of states are approaching it differently, but I think it comes down to that relationship building and trust building. And I'll stop talking because I know there's other hands raised.
Hamran, did you want to come off of mute and ask your question? I know you had your hand up previously and put the question in the chat.
Sure. Thank you, Jillian and Kate, for a great presentation. I work with Jillian in the same division. I'm leading the research branch in local and regional food division. And as Jillian said, that we have a research working with a colleague on LFPA. I want to know that what kind of experience, when it comes to one of the proposals was that paying attention to RFAs, the way that the state developed their RFAs and shared. So did you see any differences when it comes to the outcomes related to RFAs, the way that the state developed their RFAs?
I know that when we participated, it was still too early for program outcomes. I think you interviewed us in like March and we had begun purchasing like 2 weeks before. Oh, puppy. So I will just say from personal experience, if it was very, very early on for us. And I think we were among the first, so I doubt it's hard to correlate at this point, but I would love to see that as a follow-up survey, and New Mexico would be happy to participate.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that and say that, yeah, we did not get to those like real program outcomes within this, just since so many states were early on. And it's an area where, yeah, we hope future research, looks at that. And similarly, we asked components of program design, but we didn't really get into RFAs, in detail for the states that had it yet. But again, I think that would be a really fascinating thing to look at, to think about and look at how RFA design does impact program outcomes. It's a great idea.
Even if we include the way that the state needed to reach to socially disadvantaged producers as one of the outcome or expected outcome, any correlation between the way that the RFA was developed and the way that they reached the underserved producers?
Well, I think, I guess one thing that we did here, or that we got to a bit in the research, is if in that RFA, they, for LFPA, established a required amount of funds to go to socially disadvantaged producers. And so that was one difference that we saw. And, again, some states did establish that, whereas others didn't. And so I think that, we see some connections perhaps to then how confident states are feeling in terms of reaching the target outcomes that they set with the USDA. So that's one piece of RFA, but I don't know, Jillian, if you have any other thoughts in terms of like RFA dimensions that we captured in our research.
No, but frankly, it is something that I would love to understand and know better about as well. Like that's where we get at like the nitty gritty piece. And I think the RFA is just one component. Like this, like how the word gets out and the relationship building is another really important component. I think both together, the more technical things, and then also the more like social human element of how are people actually discovering these funding programs.
Thank you.
See a hand from Brenda. Would you like to unmute and?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say that initially when both of these programs came out, I was really excited. I'm Brenda Williams, and I work for Communities Unlimited, and we're based in Arkansas. So I work with growers in the Mid-South Delta region in Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. So immediately I started learning about the program to get the word out, and was really happy that our Arkansas Department of Human Services or Arkansas Department of Ag, it was a collaboration with both of them, took on this task. And what they were able to do is develop a list or a catalog with growers. And one of our tasks as a community partner was reaching out to minority growers. We already have a network of about 75 to 100 growers, and most of them are small scale Black growers, but it was reaching out and letting them know about the program and sharing insights, and also connecting them to food banks. And also what we did, we had some webinars with the HBCU and some other Black organization, and we had the administrator be on the webinar to ask questions, if they had any, the farmers could ask questions. And I think that was instrumental. But when I hear people say, well, they don't know where the Black growers are, I would say reach out to some of the HBCUs, reach out to some of the Black farmer co-ops, reach out to some of the Black growers associations, because they are out there. And it is going to probably take some time to build the trust, because even with what we were doing when I followed back up with the growers and to say, hey, how's it going? Have you been selling anything? And a number of them said, no, I didn't do it. I didn't do any, I didn't grow any crops, or they were somewhat leery about the programs, especially in the Delta, because in the Delta, we've had so many people come. If you want to try out something, you try it out in the Delta. And so they were just not, they didn't trust the program. But now I think, and I hope that they will, trust programs from the government like this, because again, we definitely did have some wins. Some of the small scale growers would tell me about, oh, Brenda, I got a call from a food bank and they're buying this, and that's a big order, and they're so excited. So the question I have, do you think this program is going to continue? And then also, what's the expiration date? And I'm always calling the administrator regarding our program in Arkansas. They had a budget of 3.7, and right now they've only utilized about 1.1 million. So my concern is what's going to happen to the rest of that funding. Thanks.
Thanks, Brenda. It's so awesome to hear your experience in Arkansas, and thank you so much for your role that you've played in the state, which is clearly really important to connecting those growers to the state. Okay, I'll try and remember. You had a lot of good questions. So the chances of it continuing, I feel like it's like a crystal ball thing. Nobody can really say, but I have heard that LFPA in particular is a really popular program. Like a lot of good things have come of it. That I think generally people agree on. There's always going to be differences in experience across the board, but because it is a generally liked program that so far has seemed like a success based on what we know and understand about it. That is really good fodder for it to continue. I mean, I do think that some of this has to happen through advocacy, both at the state and federal levels, to tell those stories like the one you just shared with us. Like, that's just part of how we do this. Like, that's part of how we keep the money going. One of the charts that I regret we didn't include in the PowerPoint is in the report, but it's like, it is staggering how much money these programs have put into the local and regional food systems when you compare it to the past decade plus of FMPP, LFPP, regional food systems, like all of the like local and regional food system grant programs. It's just like these tiny little graphs. And then in 2020, it's like, 6 times the amount of money, but in like this much time frame. So it's no surprise that we've all been like, oh my gosh, this is so much money. This is so much. I think in terms of the logistics, there's another, depending on where your state is in the program. If I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe they can apply for a no cost extension if they don't expend the funds by the time the program is up. But Kate, you would probably know that better than me from the Minnesota standpoint.
Yeah, I only know about the extension for LFS. So LFS programs, states can request a one-time no-cost extension for reasons that need to be beyond just that they can't spend their money within the time frame. And I'm not actually positive about LFPA, so someone else on this call may know that. And then in terms of like you also just mentioned the expiration date, and each state is on a different timeline based on when their funding got approved and when their work plan started. So that also makes it just a little complicated to track multiple states, but your state would be able to tell you when their funding is done, and then if they're looking into a one-time no-cost extension. And I don't know about LFPA. I know that there's the LFPA plus funding, but I'm not sure if extensions have been made available for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, the Wallace Center is strongly advocating for LFPA to continue. We released a report earlier this year that I'll pop in the chat in just a moment. Also highlighting some of the research and recommendations that we have. And one of the recommendations that we have is to continue funding this program. And I would love to invite Hannah. I see that you're in the audience, Hannah from NSAC. They popped a few things in the chat about advocating and getting in contact with her to help reach out to your local senators to, ask them to continue funding this program. Hannah, did you want to unmute and speak to that a little bit and some of the work that you've been doing with us as far as getting this program to continue?
Sure. Thanks, Melanie. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, great. Yes. I was primarily in listen mode, so it caught me in my kitchen multitasking. So thanks y'all for letting me just share a little bit more. We have been the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and I'm a policy specialist there, and I've presented maybe one or twice now on the call, so I appreciate always being welcomed to hang out and learn so much from all of you. I've probably talked to some of you in the past few weeks too, because we have been in DC really pushing for the program in this last congressional work block on just telling the story exactly like y'all are sharing now. It's because the program is so new, and because you all are really just starting to see some of the impacts on the ground. It's kind of a big lift to get out there and to tell those stories and to show that impact and let your congressional members know. So that's what we primarily were just highlighting, the good work that everyone is doing, because it is congressional members have to, there's a lot going on. There's also a lot of USDA funded programs that rolled out, new programs that rolled out for the first time. It's pretty hard to keep them all straight in DC. And so really just right now, the best thing is to just share the story, highlight the program, talk about the work that you're doing, and, showing exactly the support for the farmers that are going on in the network and your own personal networks. But we do have a sign up page, and I can drop it in here to just stay connected if there are future action opportunities. We do anticipate an LFPA marker bill, or so a bill to be introduced to sustain LFPA to be introduced in January. And I'm happy to share more with the group at that time once that's a little bit more, a little more shaped up and ready to share.
Great. Well, that's a very hopeful note that I'm hearing for the first time. So I look forward to seeing that marker bill and being able to follow up so we know how to support and outreach to our Congresspeople in supporting it. Any last thoughts or questions for Jillian and Kate while we have them here?
And if not, can we ask one of our questions?
Of course.
Selfishly, like, we have you all here, like that's why we wrote the report, so we can talk to people like you. Okay. We had 4 different questions, but I don't know, Kate, if there's one that stands out to you. I guess especially since we have Cameron here, I might ask the question, like, where do you all think further research is needed? Like, you have someone from the USDA research team on local and regional food systems. Tell Cameron what you would like his team to be researching.
Yeah. So thank you for, I should say thank you for sharing the Wallace Center, report. The first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to read that, making sure that I'm not missing anything from their side. But yes, we are excited to receive any recommendation from you as we are starting our research, LFPA research.
I think I'm very interested in the economic multiplier effect. How has $1 into this program led to more sales channels, either both for like aggregation and farm level? To me, I think that's like one of the biggest things, and why I think GusNIP and Finney has been so successful is because they show there's more spending.
For sure.
I think for me, about the missing like physical technologies for food processing and local food distribution. Because with basically every farmer I've talked to, they either have to go to a major urban center to process and or sell their food, or they just end up wholesaling all of it to a major canner or other food supplier in the country. And it's just so hard to compete with, like, a lot of them like growing lettuce, but they're never going to get cheaper than Salinas or Napa cabbage and Southern Arizona lettuce. So it's how do they specialize out of that? So my thought on it.
Wonder about how this supports certain growers and being able to scale up. As we said, like socially disadvantaged growers not having access to the same types of supports that other growers have had access to over previous generations. And I was listening to the comments about, is it the number of growers that we're supporting? And what we've found in Rhode Island is that it is more growers, and it's a more diverse range of growers, but some of the growers are growers that have not had an opportunity to get larger. And seeing, and I know we talk a lot about ag of the middle and people being able to scale into those types of things. And so we have some aggregation happening with like smaller socially disadvantaged growers, which is awesome. But also, how does it support those who haven't had access to scaling have access to that because of the sheer sort of quantity and volume that's available?
Yeah, it's very interesting that another research project that we started is looking at the existing technical, technical assistance that we have for the socially disadvantaged producers, and what else, could be produced that enable them to successfully scale up to wholesale markets. So that is another research project, a cooperative agreement that we have with Virginia Tech, which we are pushing them along with LFPA. I think both will give us a kind of understanding that how we can support, our socially disadvantaged farmers. So that is a 2-year project. Both of them are 2 years project, and we are hoping that they can, teach us and enable us to learn about, what we have and what are the missing pieces that we can provide to help them to scale up.
Something we've heard a lot on our site visits is, so we're really targeting meat producers in New Mexico because that's a big kind of statewide priority, and proteins are a priority product for the food banks. And something that we keep hearing is, this is going to help me buy a barn. This is going to help me buy fence for this field so we can have more livestock. And we hear it from farmers too. This will help me buy a tractor. And I think it's all of those kind of middle of the range capital purchases that stable purchasing, like the purchasing that can happen through LFPA, really helps facilitate. So Eva, I think you're right on that we should really be looking into those purchases that are difficult to get financed, and how maybe programs like LFPA can help support that with especially, small and socially disadvantaged farmers.
I see a question in the chat, and just Cameron, just wondering if you can provide any links or other info on that TA research project that you're working on.
So we are a small unit within local and regional food division. Last year we could establish 6 cooperative agreement with different universities, and I just talked about 2 of them, the LFPA and the wholesale and the BIPOC producer, and they're linked to the wholesale. So these were just 2 out of 6. And we are, again, we as a USDA, we try to, hear from, what are the problems, what are the issues, and see that how we can, take them into account to formulate our new research. And definitely we need your input, we need your questions, we need your wisdom to make sure that the questions that we are asking are all relevant and can help the sector.
Thank you. We'll love to connect with you.
I would be more than happy to be in touch with all of you.
Okay, Jillian, any more questions for the group?
Well, we did have one other question, was just, we talked about, what's the potential for LFS and LFPA funding to continue, but we're also really curious to hear from all of you, like how you and your partners and state agencies are starting to think about sustainability, potentially beyond just, the federal funding question. Like, are there other strategies that you're considering? And in the context of those sustainability plans, are there any conversations happening around specifically trying to link LFS and LFPA, either in program funding or, in terms of, farmers participating in both or scaling up between them? Any thoughts on sustainability?
So in New Mexico, I know I keep talking, so please feel free to stop me. Our governor has a food initiative, so there's actually a lot of support for this kind of work through our executive branch with this administration. That may not be the case forever, but maybe some potential for at least some additional operational funding from there.
Have someone in the chat, Illinois rebranded LFPA to Illinois Eats. which is a great idea for other potential funding opportunities.
I will say in Rhode Island, we have a LFPP funded project called Roadie Feeding Roadie, that is sort of building upon the other New England states. And the LFPP project was designed to flow with the LFPA project in our state. So I do think that that's a really, really smart move to sort of broaden the scope. And LFPA is part of how that work is supported, but it's not the entirety of it.
I know from a more boots on the ground perspective, at least in my work, there's a lot of talk about more farmer to farmer organizing and the need for farmers to be connected with one another. You had mentioned having their input at various decision-making levels. And I think LFPA really showcased the need for farmers to come together and be connected instead of the divide and conquer that we kind of saw through LFPA, which was, no, we want to contract individually with every single farmer and rancher completely on their own, not have any cross collaboration. And I think farmers figured out really quickly that they're stronger when they come together.
Yeah, alongside that, I don't know how many times I've said this year to farmers and communities, but I was like, hey, you should start a co-op. Hey, you should form a co-op. You guys could use a co-op, because if a group of farmers, we were at a conference last week and there was a grocer or a restaurateur who said, I can get basically any ingredient on the planet to my restaurant in under 18 hours and I live in a rural area. And that just kind of reinforced that competition that farmers face for produce. But he said, I will buy local at a slightly higher price if the quality is there, but it needs to be consistent. And that tends to be where a lot of farmers can't be, is the consistency. But in a co-op, they could kind of band together and make a rotation of food production for that sustainability piece. And I think that's where strengths can be formed, especially in extremely rural areas.
Yeah, maybe I can also add to that. So one of the, the research project that we just established is the finding and identifying some creative solution that local and rural grocery store really came up to sustain themselves using local and regional food system. So we met with a small group today, and we learned a lot about the way that they are, operating their system and how much they've grown during the last few years. So that project also enabled us to identify and highlight some of the lessons learned that we can learn throughout the country and see that how we can pass it to anybody who's running or wants to run a small rural grocery store using local and regional food to support their community. So that will be an interesting project that we are hoping that within 2 years we can finalize. And each of these projects is led by one of the experts in the branch. If you send me an email, if you are interested to learn more about the project, I will be more than happy to connect you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Unless there's other last minute questions, notes, reflections, this has been a very robust conversation. So really appreciate that everyone really paid attention and participated. I think for Jen and Miles, you can see how healthy of a community this has become over the last year. So a reminder that Melanie just threw out there is that you can always, if you're not already there, oh, I see an announcement from Julie. USDA announcement. I can stop everything.
Thanks, Andy. So this is somewhat, so one is that I'm on the core team that is also doing the LFPA research. So this has been really informative and I have been taking notes, and I know we've got some other folks that are on the research team that on this call. So really appreciate all the rich information and questions you guys are providing here, and please don't hesitate to continue to probe us on key questions we should be exploring. The other piece is, so one of the other kind of halves of my job is working on another new USDA program that's focused on farm labor. And I'm just making this announcement because we've only got a few weeks left in the application deadline for the Farm Labor Stabilization and Protection Pilot Program. And I think it is a particularly compelling program for a lot of smaller and underserved producers that are also agricultural employers. So I just wanted to flag that for your networks. We'll be sending out, our team will be sending out a one kind of last email, I think today or tomorrow, reminding folks about our office hours and that we have all kinds of recorded webinars out about the program. But just and I'm putting that link in the chat right now. So this is the link for the Farm Labor Stabilization Protection Pilot Program grant. These are grants of $25,000 to $2 million. Larger growers eligible for the larger grants, but I think that a lot of smaller growers, partly just because of the relationships they have with their employees, sometimes are already doing the kinds of things that make them eligible for the higher level award in this Farm Labor Pilot Grant Program. So really encourage you to get the word out. We'll be sending out an email to all the points of contact that are the AMS LFPA points of contact and LFS, I believe, just because we know that you guys are working with a lot of smaller underserved growers. So would appreciate you getting the word out, and hopefully this is really beneficial to a lot of your networks.
Great, thank you for that. And Melanie, you had a share as well?
Yeah, well, I just want to again thank everyone. I want to thank Kate and Jillian for their time today. I really want to thank Andy and Ava again for their time stewarding this community of practice all year. It's been wonderful to work with you, and I hope that we continue to work together. So Ava, we can continue sharing our nail art together. And I also just wanted to remind everyone, Andy was getting to this, we do have a discussion board through our platform where you can continue this conversation and any conversation offline in our community discussion boards. And I encourage you all to utilize that space. This conversation was very, very hot, and we would love for you to have a space to continue this conversation. The other thing I want to announce is that we are in January launching our mentorship program. And so applications will be open in January. We have 12 different mentors that will be supporting the network through one-on-one mentorship. And just want to let you all know here today that that will be launching pretty soon. And then the Wallace Center is continuing on in its LFPA research. We have some more reports that are coming out. We're doing small spotlights on LFPA, which is we're spotlighting, I think, 10 different states as well that will be coming down the pipeline soon, and hopefully to see some of that in early January. So again, I just want to thank you all. I want to pass it back to Andy and Ava for a close out. And if you have any questions, you can always contact us directly at the Wallace Center. I can put my email in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Kate and Jillian, and the recording I think will be made available as well. Yeah, and thank you all. It's been a great year, and I think that we learned as much from you all. And this place, I think, was really built by all of the voices that you raised. And I know it's hard to do 90-minute meetings, but you all showed up, did the breakouts, and really shared your expertise in this very emergent space. So it's been great to work with Wallace and Ava and all of you, and hope to stay in touch, and we'll absolutely stay in attendance because there's still so much to learn, and we still very much want to share our work out here in California. So I'll put my email in again, but thank you all. It's been wonderful here, and I'll pass to Ava.
Same. I just really appreciate all the brilliance and and I think the shared commitment that we all have to reaching these producers, and also reaching the people who are ultimately benefiting from having access to this fresh, healthy food that we're talking about. And so I think that this is the vanguard, and we're making such a big difference in all of our respective states and communities. And it's super, super inspiring. And I talk about all of you all of the time when I'm talking to my folks here in our little state of Rhode Island, but also just, as much as possible, I think it's great when we can share our successes with each other, and then, with the broader food system world that don't necessarily know how hard we're all rocking it out with this program and with these farm to food assistance programs. And yeah, I just really appreciate all of you and everything that we've all learned from each other. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And if y'all all want to just come off mute and make a joyful noise for Andy and Ava, and as we celebrate the new year, can I get y'all to unmute and make a joyful noise like, yay, woo-hoo.
Yeah.
Woo!
Woo! Thank you for all you've done too. And thank you so much, Wallace, for organizing this and for like running these Zooms so I didn't have to figure out how to do a breakout session. Appreciate you.
And shout out to Elizabeth and Ellie who are here almost all of the way and aren't here today, but for sure.
They were broker. They loved
right onto US 92.
Thanks for calling in during your commutes.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a
everyone.
wonderful holiday.